Hello, everyone, and thank you. I am very pleased to have a conversation with two people at different ends of a discipline. Shall we put it like that? Which is to say that, the premise of this talk was how I play live. And Tom, as you astutely observed, does not play live, at least not at the moment, though you reserve that option. And Surain, you do play live.
Yeah.
But I think both of you have a very common shared interest, and indeed you've made stuff together. But I think the meaning of what we want to talk about is weird interfaces and why we may choose to surround ourselves with them, and how we use weird interfaces to play live, and why we do that. Because Tom, you design instruments as music thing modular, and so you told me recently that your general aim in life is to make interfaces as hard as possible to use in order to make better music. And Surain, you use old technology, both hardware and perhaps even more interestingly to me, software.
Yeah.
What I tragically have to reflect on is called vintage software, which is to say the software that came out and was new when I was a little bit younger. It feels like not that long ago. No. And I will love to talk to you about that, because Surain has a blog called Missing Music, or a Medium thing, and it's using pieces of software from 99, 2000, 2001. Yeah. So there's this era of niche single developer weird bits of software, and you're running them on 25-year-old Mac computers, as we see in this loop, playing live with things that are not really meant to play live. So first, I think let's start with the workshop set, and I'd like to ask you to talk about this, and I've got a little clip here, which is from this set where Surain, you played live using Tom's workshop, which is a little synth. I'm going to play a little clip, which is a minute of the... So what we have is this set that, over I think a 25-minute, is it half an hour period, takes us from sort of, percussion through to ambient noiseescapes. And as I understand it, you were using a workshop and a Korg Chaos Pad 3.
Yeah.
And so, can you start us off? Talk to me about how you approach a set like this and at playing live with a somewhat obtuse instrument.
Yeah. And
why you pair it with a Chaos Pad and that process.
Yeah, so I think there's something about wanting to really showcase as much of the instrument. It felt like this sort of demo performance, because also for myself, I was maybe had used the instrument for a few weeks, if that, before the performance. So I was very much figuring it out in the run up to it, my first sort of interaction with it. And so then I really then felt like I wanted to share all the many possibilities of of the instrument.
Yeah.
Which was a kind of ridiculous challenge to set myself. My first performance with it, live, improvised.
And you were live patching it, right?
Yeah.
You started from unpatched.
Yeah, which is also just unbelievable. And the cool thing about the workshop system is there's these micro programmable cards, right? And each card can contain many different utilities or effects and synthesizer things. And so I just ended up changing these cards live as well, on the spot, which is kind of ridiculous, which somehow worked. And I think using the Chaos Pad, and they're all on this keyring. I had a bunch of them fiddling through in the dark, trying to find the right card and plug it in time. But the Chaos Pad I think helped primarily as this an effects unit sort of at the end of the chain, just to help glue
what
things.
Can you actually do with a Chaos Pad 3?
Oh my god, it's incredible. I love the Chaos Pad 3, and I've used it for a long time in sort of various setups. It's honestly, I don't know whether I could say it's underrated, because it's a really powerful thing. In this performance, I was doing a lot of live looping. But
is
then
it 4 loops that it has?
Yeah, it has 4 loops. You can do resampling,
Right.
resampling including the effects on top. So really, for that performance, it really helped to have this kind of final thing at the end of the audio chain, just to do some of the things I wanted, which I couldn't maybe entirely within the workshop system.
Yeah. So do you think about like what you're going to play beforehand? How do you think about the arc of a set, and like what will I give myself to do? How will it be structured?
Yeah, I did. I had sort of figured out a set, but it being a bit improvised, I allowed some kind of freedom, to play around. It doesn't always go to plan.
Yeah. I.e., you get the wrong card, or,
Yeah,
or you just don't know what's going to happen,
yeah,
right?
and it's kind of dark in there. It's like a massive purple lit room, and I was sort of nervous just because it was the first performance. I've performed a lot, in my time, I guess, but I'm still relatively new to the modular world. But I was up for the challenge, and I took it on.
Tom, what was your reaction to this set?
So it was.
Wins the microphone, please.
It was for me. It was a really extraordinary kind of moment because I've been building this thing for like getting on for a year at that stage.
Might need to be a bit close.
And I hadn't. It was definitely not designed as something to use live in that way. It's not like you plug this in and you can play a live set from it. So it was amazing for me to see and to hear how kind of complicated and how diverse and how just interesting and good it sounded.
Yeah.
And how you were able to go through these kind of stages, I guess. And for me, as I said, I've got no experience of playing live, no experience of improvising in that way. And so seeing that kind of, just seeing you do that was amazing. And it was just fascinating for me to see, I guess it's how somebody uses that as an instrument or as a series of instruments. And actually, I design it to be flexible and open and to be able to move quickly between different sounds. But I think of that in a kind of quite abstract sort of, technical way almost. Actually seeing somebody doing it was amazing for me. It
Was
really exciting.
surely gratifying.
Yeah. Incredibly gratifying, incredibly like,
It's like, it can do
wow,
it.
that actually works.
Yeah, it can actually do this. Because I suppose it's the thing, if you're not actually a performer, how can you innately know that you've designed a successful interface?
And I definitely wouldn't say I was designing an interface that it would be even practical to play live with.
Yeah.
That's definitely not something that I would be able to claim any expertise in doing at all.
This feels like a good moment to bring up the fact that the TB303 has one of the most diabolical interfaces of all music technology, and yet is considered one of the greatest pieces of live equipment. And this then begs the question, Seraine, we've got missing music, and there's a whole thing to talk about there. But I just sort of what do you give yourself to do live, in that sense? How much do you relinquish to the instruments? How much do you want to have control of? And I wanted to ask you, adjacent to that, is what you're looking for in a live performance. What is a good live performance to you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, one I've not considered, or at least, it's just a subliminal thing, something is, driving those decisions. But I think there's something about having a variety or at least, in context of this, which was, say, a 25-ish minute performance. I didn't want it to be a long form thing, if that makes sense. I really wanted to sort of have these vignettes, and so then, that also lent itself to using different cards, because I wanted to, have different sound, synthesis types, or this percussive thing, and that I wasn't able to then do the kind of drony ambient thing with the same card, so I had to change physically, the sort of program that I was running, and there was a fair bit of, I guess, changing cables here and there, but yeah, I think variety, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I definitely I'm thinking about a set that I would be interested in seeing.
Yeah.
You know?
It's just like, yeah. And Tom, what is your like idealized live performance? Obviously, you saw this thing recently with my professor as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things I find amazing about the live modular stuff is how I've seen people who are really kind of accomplished, famous people, where it seems to just all fall apart, where they play and it just doesn't seem to work for them that night, and that seems incredibly kind of risky and live in a way that you go and see a band and they might have a slightly better night or a slightly off night. It's generally more about the crowd and the sound system. They kind of play the songs and it's fine. But as I said, I've seen modular people where you're like, yeah, that just didn't really work, did it? It didn't happen. Yeah. And equally, I've been to see people where it just feels like it's all come together, or there's something in them that kind of comes out through the performance. I mean, I talk about kind of chutzpah, people who somehow put something into the performance that really kind of comes across, but it'd be very hard for me to explain what it was that they were doing.
Okay.
Whereas I think the contrast, it was on, I was talking about on Friday, I went to see Mad Professor playing in Croydon, and it was extraordinary. It was a very kind of small gig that Simon is doing the DIY promoted, and that was like seeing an absolute virtuoso who's been practicing for 45 years. He was playing on this very small, very kind of simple setup of like a multi-track. He had this little box of SD cards that was like this kind of concentrated gold of Mad Professor's multi-tracks. He'd put them in this multi-track player. They'd come into a simple like Midas mixer. They'd go out to a simple kind of 2-channel delay reverb thing, and then he had a looper. But it was phenomenal. It sounded incredible, and you were just watching him playing, and it was one of those classic things I said to you. You watch it and go, oh, that looks easy. That looks really easy. He's just doing this. And if I bought that mixer and that delay, and then that'd be great. I'd sound like him. And completely in experience, you would never, ever in a million years sound like him if you practiced forever. But I thought that was such a kind of classic virtuoso piece of work that he was doing. Whereas a lot of my understanding of modular feels like much more, it's what happens in the moment. But I don't know, that's for me as a punter, you go and go, it's a very, very difficult thing they're doing that can just fall apart or can be amazing.
Well, yeah, and I'm thinking also of simplicity, like talking about this idea of chutzpah, and also like just having a simple setup is because it feels to me like that the simpler the setup, the more you can have mastery over it. Yeah. Like if you have a complicated thing with lots of spinning plates, like you are not necessarily going to be in control of it. And it feels like simplicity is key. And I mean, Seraine, it's like you are doing, many different movements and things, but you are really using a very simple setup. I wonder if you could speak to that. Like, what is your like minimum viable setup? And can you talk a bit about simplicity? Because it does seem like you choose simpler setups, but they're still really, there's still depth and they're still quite obtuse. But I know it's that's what I mean. There's a weird dichotomy, but it's. Do you see what I mean?
I sort of put myself through hell sometimes, especially with the vintage Mac stuff. That's a whole other world, and it really is a nightmare. Sometimes I'm just questioning my life, choices.
Have you made that like doo sound, the restart sound, part of your set, just that with loads of reverb? It's killer, mate.
Honestly, yeah,
which is just as well.
I think by some miracle, with maybe the 15 gigs I've played with that setup, only once have one of the Macs just crashed.
Fully,
But I think playing with this system, you're right that there's this simplicity to it. The portability is also a huge factor, right? I mean, it's incredibly portable.
I was very proud of that gig when you rocked up with a tote bag.
Yeah.
With that and your Chaos Pad in it. Having seen you at the previous one with this
loads of
trolleys of Macs and projectors.
But I think also what's great is you with this kind of self-contained system, you kind of have the flexibility of sort of honing in and maybe going simple or not, and doing something way more complicated. And that freedom is incredibly empowering, because for the performance I'm doing later, this latest sort of patch I've wired up, it's my favorite thing I've done, put together so far, and I just want to perform that patch. So for this, it's even somehow more simplified, because it's basically exploring this patch over a certain amount of time.
Yeah.
So I'm not doing anything as ambitious as before, where I'm juggling these program cards around. But again, I think my idea is that this is going to be equally as interesting, or sonically.
Yeah. Even though there's no chaos pad, or is there a chaos
there
pad?
is
There is chaos pad.
Yeah. There's actually two extra pieces.
Okay, because I was going to ask you, what is this minimal? What is my Panda Shall Fly minimal viable set? What do you need on your rider effectively to play?
You know what? I've had so many different setups, and I think I've kind of enjoyed that thing of over the years, trying out different kind of live hardware setups. And I've sort of done some much larger things, but I think the kind of, I don't know, I like there's something refreshing about almost changing up the setup every now and then, and explore, and almost have maybe the audience or the listener witnessing that live interaction, especially in that improv environment, which you can see that the sound is being created in the moment. You can see that what my hands are doing.
Yeah, your hands are doing things.
Right, and this is, that's a key part of this Missing Music project, where I live project both desktops, because I want people to see what is happening, which is live.
Yeah. It's improv. So I suppose also the question is, how important is it that it's improv versus pre-recorded? This is also why with the Mad Professor thing, it's quite interesting, because he's a wicked example that it's technically pre-recorded, but also totally improv, right?
I mean, yeah, he's what he's doing is remixing it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the magic of it, is that I assume his remixing of it is. You from watching it, you got a sense that there were a few bits where you'd see him whack a fader up, I think, to find out what was on that channel. And it would be like a guitar hit or a piece of percussion, and he was doing it timed, so it would sound okay.
Oh, yeah.
But I got the impression that he doesn't
checking.
really know what's on the channel, and he's focusing on a couple of channels that he knows, and then, one's the vocal, and then, but the thing he's performing, I got the impression, was completely live and kind of improvised, as in he's been doing it for 40 years, so he's probably got entire muscle memory on what he's looking for, what he's trying to do. But yet he had, I don't know if it was 4 or 8 tracks of stuff that's completely pre-recorded and completely kind of locked.
Do you think they were just full loops on each channel? I wonder what.
No, I don't know. We talked about this a lot. There was an amazing thing he did. So he had this kind of basic kind of 4-track play. He had a thing where he would just whack stop or reset on that, and it was exactly the same thing as doing a rewind, but he wasn't doing the rewind with spinning it back. He would just whack it, and then there would be this kind of moment of silence. He obviously knew exactly how long it was before it would restart. It was it was amazing.
Mastery.
But it was pure virtuoso kind of thing.
I want to talk about Missing Music now, because we have another little clip of you playing Serene, and sorry, sorry, Tom. And Serene, what is Missing Music?
So Missing Music, it began as a sort of as a blog or this personal archive of obsolete and sort of hard to find and esoteric Mac music software. So it began or begins from what I feel is the golden era, say in the 90s, with OS 9, up till maybe 2010, 2011. I have this I have a vague cutoff point, which I feel is where some of the best or the most interesting and original Mac music software was made. So somehow become obsessed for about 3-4 years now, just hunting down a lot of this stuff. Just spending kind of maybe more time than I should. Really,
but
just
why not?
yeah, and really kind of being on this quest to salvage and save and retrieve and archive just this stuff, because as it turns out, a lot of these old softwares are disappearing and they're sort of they're missing, they're somewhere out there, and it turns out they're becoming harder to find because more and more websites are going offline, and files go missing.
And there is a thing called bit rot I discovered in hard drives, where like data will just corrupt over time.
Yeah.
Talk about, I guess, why? Like, why this era? What is like speaking to you in this?
So I think part of it was that I was always a Windows guy, right? So forever I'd always had Windows systems and whatnot. And I guess I'm also old enough to have been there somewhat during that era of VST and sort of audio tools. But I was always just into the Windows stuff. And I've got I remember just exploring a ton of that stuff. There was felt like millions of free VSTs as well. It was like gold mine. But I guess in parallel there was always this curiosity of the stuff that was only available for Mac, or sometimes sort of cross-platform. But I just wanted to explore that stuff because it was unfamiliar, and it was alien.
Treasure trove. Or
and there were some things every now and then I'd come across, sort of keep a tab on, that just looked unbelievable. It was sort of really getting to me because I just wanted to check it out. And
it's basically like inside. I think I have like a picture of one thing that I found, but like it seems that there's like these insane. I don't even know what this is.
Yeah.
Can I get you to this is obviously a bit of a mega question. It's like, what's your favorite synth? But can you give us a little like deep cut? My Panda Shall Fly's like top hits for like weird Mac software. What are your favorite ones that you come back to?
Yes, so I think definitely one of the first sort of packages that really drew me in, and sort of was the point where I was like I need to just, instead of going down the emulation kind of path, I just wanted to do it very authentically, just buying the native like hardware, just because that would be, it's guaranteed to work. So Cycling 74's Pluggo environment and sort of ecosystem is unbelievable.
Pluggo was like a series of plugins, wasn't it?
It was pre-Max for Live
They're like
plugins.
weird plugins.
It's unbelievable.
I had that. I had some of them.
Yeah,
I can't remember what they were.
They were honestly, it's unbelievable. Really original designs and programming, and that I think that was what really did it for me, because they weren't just your average audio effects or sort of tools. They were weird, and it was just kind of inspiring because I was like, okay, so there's all this other stuff like it. So Pluggo is definitely one of them. And then you've got this, incredible suites like the GRM tools, which have I think been around for a few decades in various sort of forms. And these are like really high-end like stuff. It's they were like super professional tools, at their time. And I think there's part of me thinking this stuff is just as good today. And it's kind of a shame that a lot of this stuff got pushed to the sideline, or it's become obsolete because operating systems move on.
We're getting a bit homogenized potentially, and there's this thing where basically the plugin manufacturers may be looking at what other people are doing and like, well, they've got a really good reverb, so let's just make a really good reverb. Whereas at that time, it feels like the rules were not set in stone at that point. They were not ossified, so that you could do really weird stuff. And I think that is partially true still now because we have Max for Live, and there is that experimental like wing of music tech. But it's this idea of, like with modular, it's this idea that it was possible to make things as a single developer that didn't have to like sell 1,000 units to be justifiable. And it feels like I hope that's still happening. Do you think it is, or what do you think? Or do you think it's necessary to plumb these archives to find it, that kind of creativity?
Yeah, I think, like, I guess there's a part of, this, the effort with this blog kind of thing, even just to have this, like, resource hub, just to even, like, travel back through time, just to see some of the things that were available.
Yeah.
And, it's funny because we're talking, it's not like I'm talking about, tools from like 100 years ago. This is like 20 years ago.
Well, yeah,
right?
but then it's like when I think about it, this is the thing that freaks me out is it's
Yeah.
the same span of distance from like, from the invention of the DX7 to the first like commercially available synthesizers. Right? I mean, like late 60s to early 80s is like, that takes you from the modular to sort of from the Moog modular to the DX7. That's the same span of time.
The best-selling synthesizer in the world.
So, and so like, talk to me about how would people actually get these to run? How, if you wanted to try this stuff, how is it done?
So, there's a ton of emulators, right, for, I guess all operating systems. But weirdly, I don't have much experience with that because I've just decided to go down just the sort of original, route of, I have a massive collection of vintage Mac computers now, which...
So just go on eBay.
Go on eBay and...
Yeah, but also beyond eBay, honestly, some of the, I guess, harder to find stuff, that isn't just being sold by some random person for like £300, right? And it's, it just lives on eBay for like forever.
Yeah, not getting bought.
Yeah, and so like, end up actually just finding these things in odd corners, like, and I just travel to the weirdest parts of, Greater London just to get these things for what may seem like a great deal, but I spent maybe like £20 on the train ticket. But yeah, I've ended up now having various systems that all run on various operating systems.
Yeah.
And now this is kind of this lab for maybe when I come across a software, I'm sort of increasing the chance of them being able to run on one of the systems I have.
So there's like a few generations, isn't there? There's like G3, G4, and G5, right?
Yeah. So
which is an ideal. Cause I bought a Pismo recently, and with great thanks to you for like giving. I was like literally Instagram DMing you like, Saran, can you please help me with this? Like,
but honestly, like the Pismo is, I think it's become my favorite computer now because it can run OS 9 and OS X.
Yes.
It's got a multitude of like I/O ports, which is incredible. And especially when I'm performing live, I project both computers. And it's got VGA out, which is great. You don't need any weird peripheral adapters. So, the G3 Pismo PowerBook is incredible. The iBook G4 is also like super powerful because it can run OS 9 under the classic environment. So I think, those are kind of the essentials for me because you're running like two systems. The G3 PowerBooks can dual boot, which is also super cool.
How do you mean? So it can run both operating systems?
Yeah, so when you sort of turn it on, you hold down Alt and you can choose. And I've got like many OSs on there now as like a testing system.
So I know you can put SSDs in them as well, but I suppose how would you play with them? Like, so you've got, let's go back to we've got a little clip of you playing. Yeah. I can see you've got two Macs behind Tom's head. Sorry. You're all right, Tom. What is your sort of minimum viable missing music set? And how is this working?
Yeah, so it consists of it's minimum two computers, right? And I project the visuals from both of them, which is also sometimes a bit difficult.
Are they on top of each other?
Yeah,
that's nice.
And usually, the average venue they don't account for multiple visuals on one screen. So I'm always like coming up with various like solutions, or trying to figure out with the team there how either you try and like squish the screen down and put two, or you overlay them, and I suppose like how it's displayed is not necessarily super important. It's just I want to still show what's happening on the screen. So yeah, I've got the two laptops. In this case, I think one's an iBook G4. The other one is I think it's the first MacBook, which is also white. And I'm literally running them into a mixer. And as because you can see my desktops, you can just see I'm just improvising, picking up a software,
Loading it up.
yeah, or, in real time. You can see the kind of decision making because sometimes I'm like browsing through the folder.
The mouse goes one way.
Yeah,
Wait,
and sometimes you see the spinning wheel, and I'm just, so it's all like very much live, and I think hopefully it's part of the sort of fun.
Do you have effects on the mixer?
No.
So it's just like what WYSIWYG, as it were, like Wizzy here.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's very raw. Yeah, I didn't realize it's not decorated in any sense. But I think that's also because, my belief is that, some of the sounds that these things create are incredible. They're super flexible. It's versatile, and I'm sort of confident that they sound incredible.
And ultimately, it's this idea that we have been conditioned through generational, planned obsolescence. Every year a new iPhone, every year a new Mac, every year a new M processor now, and it's like, well, the old ones are shit. How the hell did any mugs get any work done on a M1? And I'm like, mate, Aphex Twins Drux was made on a Pismo.
Right, yeah.
So it's like 500 megahertz. Shut up.
If that,
just get to work.
That's the thing. I think that's what's also interesting with doing this kind of thing live, because obviously at the time, this was all you had. And, it's this isn't the first time people were doing this kind of thing. So it's just, I'm sort of borrowing from, this kind of format of how a certain strand of electronic music was made in late 90s, turn of the millennium. So, and it's kind of just like revisiting that and playing with the challenges and the confines of just what I have.
Can you talk a bit about how you research and practice and prepare? Because you've got to have a base level of knowledge and confidence that I know these ensembles are going to be the ones. What is actually the process of that? How does someone learn to do this, and how would they learn to steer this weird stuff live?
It honestly can be quite difficult because you're really toiling with the limited processor speed, and that's why sometimes I'm just kicking myself, because often I find I'm maybe pushing one of the computers too far, because I'm getting excited. I want to run maybe 2 to 3 programs at the same time. Can you do that
as well? Run 3 things?
It can. Sometimes it really struggles, and then you learn on the
don't do that.
Yeah, you learn the lesson. You quickly Command Q and you quit. And there's something about just it's very unplanned, and I think there's an excitement for me, keeps the set exciting and sort of refreshing, because I'm not performing just a very strict set. I'm not there's not a sequence of songs, and it's all it's improvised. So it's fun because then it's this challenge for me of I want to make this set different from the last one, and I'm figuring out some new combinations. What maybe goes well with another tool or VST or something.
Can we talk about interface design in general?
Yes.
Tom, you can please take a say. You absolutely can, because this is very much in your wheelhouse. It's just Tom, what is a good interface?
Well, I'm not sure. I was going to ask actually about sticking with the mix and music. How much? Because what you find, and the fact is visual as well.
Yeah.
How much of it is that the interface is mad and different and interesting, and how much is the actual processing underneath that's interesting?
Yeah, I definitely can't deny that there's a obsession as well and fascination with the visual side of things. And I think it's true that the tools that I will sort of lean towards when playing live, because it's been projected, I think I do want them to be interesting, somewhat colourful, But
even just as an interface, I think that's what was so interesting, was the way it does feel a bit like if you're building something that works in Ableton and it works in Logic and it works in everything else, then there's a pressure to make it as standardized as possible. Whereas in this era, it was just these random programs that ran by themselves, so they were absolutely just inventing the interface as they went along.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that you could probably make the same sounds with a modern system somehow, but you wouldn't think to
No. But then that's the thing that also, also relates to this kind of, interaction with, the workshop system, where there's something about the process, right, that affects the outcome. And I think I'm very much into that kind of school of thought of, I wouldn't be making this music on, with this gear at all, and vice versa, just because of its like quirks and whatnot. But that's the thing, I think, again, with all the software I've now collected and, archived, I'm not even familiar with all of them.
Yeah.
So there's that thing where, as I'm exploring some of this stuff, as I'm getting familiar with them, usually from playing live with them, then I'm understanding how they work as I go. Yeah. And sometimes you have some of these interfaces that are just really weird because these are all standalones, like you're saying. But it's also just to showcase like some of these incredible like creations. They, it's like just like a flyby through like some part of computer music history. Yeah. Which was important.
I was going to go on.
Sorry, what was the question you asked?
Well, ultimately the question is like, what are these interfaces like lending themselves to? I suppose and that's ultimately what you're asking too. And I think that's right. It's like ultimately, my experience of electronic music gear and why I want to try everything is because I believe, heart of hearts, that the interface does to some extent dictate what you make and what I have hardware for and what I probably want software for, really, if I think about it, is to have an interesting limitation.
Yeah.
Is that word, interesting limitation, is because we cannot operate in a void. At least it's not fun to, I don't think. I think it's fun when a manufacturer has imposed some parameters on what you're able to do. And obviously with like missing music, it seems that you've just got a freaking goldmine of that, where some wonderful weirdo has said, this is the very weird limited parameters I will give you. Yeah. And I maybe don't name everything well because it's just mostly been made for me. And that imposes its will on you in some way. And it's about you just sort of like, almost like you've been moved into a room and it's dark and you're feeling around to try and work out what you can do in that space. And that, to me, is the essence of electronic music gear. For me, is like just fiddling with some, be it a workshop, a Turing machine or whatever, and just being like, well, what will happen if I do this? And
one of the really interesting things with doing this was the fact that everyone has the same thing. Yeah. So if you've got one, I've got one, we all got the same thing in front. And now they're out in the world, and you have a community of people. They are literally finding things that it can do that I didn't design.
That is a very important point.
And they're equally able to share ideas and ways of using it that in Eurorack worlds you don't have, because everyone's got different stuff. So you can talk about how you can build something with your setup, and people will study that and understand and learn from it, but it's not literally the same thing. And that sense of it being a kind of closed system has been so interesting for me to see. What do you put in, what do you take out? But then things I deliberately didn't put in because I didn't have space, somebody's like, oh, you can use this. And genuinely things that, we were talking earlier, there's a one of the things that's fundamentally missing from this really is it doesn't have an attenuator. And I was kind of aware of that, and I didn't really have space for one, and I didn't prioritize it. But somebody in the community realised that there's something else. There's in fact two things you can perfectly well use as attenuators. And I now use that all the time. And you were saying you use that constantly. Yeah. And there's this little corner of the system that people are using for something quite different. So the design and the interface I design then gets understood in different ways. And actually, it's quite annoying that it's so small. Because had I designed it, I would have made that knob much bigger than it is.
You should just make like a 4 times size workshop with like all the same things, just like mega knobs.
Somebody here too can talk about taking something small and making it much bigger. Yeah, that's a separate story.
But you were saying, and responding to the fact that ultimately, the interface dictates itself to you, but equally, the human will do different things when dictated to, and I've thought that often of like, if I got my hands on like Stevio's modular synth, would I make music that sounded like Stevio, or would it sound like me? And I think there is a degree, like Tim Exile's, pattern shift now on the push, and before, why can't I think of what it's called? Oh no, sorry, Tim.
It's not endless.
No, not endless. Oh my God!
One before that.
I've just dried up, which is bad.
He's made like a ton of incredible.
He has. Ensembles. He is that weirdo making amazing bits of like react patches. But the point is that like he has this generative thing, escape shift.
Yeah.
Escape shift. Thank you, brain. And people will make different sounding things on his thing.
Yeah.
It does sound scape shifty, but it does because you choose when to roll the dice. And I think you bring up a very important point. It's like, irrespective of what the interface does, the human has, and I suppose it's just that it's finding a balance, right? As an instrument designer, are you watching how people react? Did you change things in workshop based on people having a bad experience with the controls?
I think the real tension is between wanting to make something that is, for me, that's not imposing myself or not imposing kind of judgment and decisions, while at the same time making something that is distinctive and quirky and is, and has strong opinions in it. Because you could take those things, put the same size knob on every control, try to put as many controls as you possibly could into it, and make something that was more flexible, I guess, because it would have more controls. But I would absolutely be like, we need some big knobs.
This is the size it should be.
And we need some small knobs. And there's an awful lot where it isn't there. In the circuit for these oscillators, you could have 2 or 3 times as many controls if you wanted to, but you have to make that decision to pull it back. And I think that balance between absolutely open and sort of you're getting out of the way and you're saying, I don't want to impose on people, I want people to be able to do as many different things they possibly can, while at the same time clearly making something that's quite characterful and is probably just me. I don't think anyone else makes something exactly like this. That I find a really interesting kind of mysterious balance. And I'm trying to make it open, but I'm kind of aware that actually I'm imposing enormous amounts of my opinionated brain on it.
Yeah. So, final question, Tom. What is one weird piece of hardware that people must try?
A weird piece of hardware? Oh, well, the thing I've been using at the moment is the Playdate.
Oh, yeah?
So Playdate, tiny little thing about this big, costs about 200 quid. It's a kind of video game console designed by a company that's like a software company, I think. I don't know who they are.
Hardware,
they're called
Teenage
Panic.
Engineering.
No, the company that makes the software is called Panic.
Yeah.
And they make like text editors and stuff. I don't know much, but it's designed by Teenage Engineering physically. It has, its interface is like a cross up, down, left, right thing, an A button and a B button, and a little crank that folds out the side of the thing, and you turn it around like this.
Obviously.
And a accelerometer. So it's such a weird, quirky set of like interfaces.
Yeah.
And it's got a screen. It's this beautiful screen. It's a old school LCD screen. So you have to have quite bright light on it to be able to see it. It's just purely weird and quirky and quite an interesting interface to play with.
Great. Also, people should probably try this thing workshop as well. Just to plug that. Music thing workshop. And Seraine, what is one weird piece of software that people absolutely have to try?
I was like preparing a hardware question.
Well, you can please do both if that's easier.
That's like, honestly.
I suppose, is there something that will run on a modern computer, or is there like?
Yeah. Okay. I with some of the posts and sort of roundups I do on Instagram, with some of this missing music, collection. I remember when I posted about Orange Vocoder, which is just a classic, right? There was a lot of love for that, and it got me thinking about all the other vocoder plugins just from that era, which there were plenty, but I've been collecting this list in my head, and there's something. I think there's about 5 which are just incredible. But Orange Vocoder still exists, and there's thankfully some of these software, the developers, I guess they've been generous enough to just keep them updated for modern systems, and so things like Orange Vocoder, I'm sure it wouldn't be that difficult to run some of the like native instrument stuff. You know, I mean that was super
Can
powerful.
you run it in like Sheep Shaver?
Yeah, there's all
which
that,
is
yeah.
Like, Sheep Shaver is like a virtual OS 9 environment you can
Yeah.
run in. Okay.
There's Basilisk and there's all sorts.
Yeah.
But you know, like I mean, native instruments they do some incredible stuff. You know, like vocator and spectral delay. You know, some of this stuff was like, you know, once they disappeared and sort of, you know, became obsolete. You know, it was like a dark day. I've felt like for, you know, like software, you know, computer music making, because they were like incredible programs. You know, the Pro 52, the FM7, you know, like classics, right? At least, you know, in my world. And I think it's worth the effort to like really dive back into some of these things, because, you know, they could be like a wealth of like, you know, sound inspiration and you know, it could lead you to make your next record.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, thank you both. Seren Senavarathne, and
you.
your handle on Instagram,
My Panda Shall Fly.
My Panda Shall Fly, and Tom Whitwell of Music Thing, your handle on Instagram is
Music Thing Modular.
Music Thing Modular. Check them both out. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alex.
Mic drop. Thank you. Have you always done that? I could have done that at any time. Thank you both.
Thank you for having us.